Now, I have a fair bit to say about this show. Most of it ain't happy, but that will be in a different video. For now, let's stick to a spoiler-free review. Right off the bat, the show contains scenes that involve pre-adults as well as a pain and innuendo. Most of it isn't too much, but it's noteworthy in case you wanted to watch it with the family. It ain't a great choice for that, or if you are just kinda squeamish about that stuff. I'm not gonna say that the content is problematic, I tend not to view things in that way, but it is kinda cheap. It's in the nature of shocking content to create discomfort. It's kind of what makes the content shocking. But I think it's gotta be earned. It needs a valid reason to be there. Otherwise, it's no different from any old creepypasta that has gore and death and intestines everywhere for no good reason. And in the case of this show, my problem is more so that it is just isn't earned. If anything, it's kinda in the way. Maiden is about an abyss and a bunch of explorers trying to reach the bottom. That really kinda encapsulates the entirety of the plot. There's mysteries and old relics along the way, but nothing you wouldn't expect from the setting, especially after the first episode. What you see is what you get. It has themes like exploration, family, love, and camaraderie, and an underlying mystery regarding what is at the bottom of the abyss, but the story remains fairly scaled down, with most of the runtime focusing on the three main characters and the problems involving them directly. There are mentions of a political system and a fight for power, but none of that really comes into play. There's the cast, there's the hole, and then there's things standing between them and the bottom of that hole. Now, is it good? To be straight with you, I don't get the hype around it. I know it's fairly popular and respected. Couldn't tell you why. I find it somewhat hard to review shows like this because although I wouldn't let popularity change my view on the quality of the show, a high popularity does mean you have a good chance of enjoying it, purely mathematically speaking. And I wouldn't want someone to miss out on enjoying something because of my bad review. But I also want to help out the people who might want to skip it. The thing has 2 seasons and 3 movies. 2 of the movies are essentially the first season, so you can just skip to movie 3 and then watch the second season and be done with it. But it's still a lot. So why might you skip it? A lot of the writing is really rather bad. The dialogue is impressively poorly written. Someone may say it's a matter of most of the cast being kids, but to that I would raise you pen pals. A lot of that story is kids talking, but the dialogue is way better without exceeding the limitations one would expect from a bunch of kids. The plot isn't too terrible per se, though the pacing is atrocious. Had it been written better, it may have been quite a solid story, but a lot of the reveals and plot twists come as a direct result of a character outright saying dumb shit like, "Oh, I was only pretending to be evil, I'm actually a nice guy." So most of it either falls flat or is rather disappointing. It gets really hard to get about the story at some point. The world building, I'm assuming, is one of the main reasons people like this thing, but that was also fairly bad. It just feels so shallow. I'll go more in detail on this specifically in a video with spoilers, so for now I will say that it at least isn't really inconsistent, which is nice. They at least don't break already established rules, such high standards I know. A lot of it is kind of a result of the plot problems. Elements tend to be added as needed based on what the plot requires to continue. Rarely are you presented with something that makes you say, "Oh, it makes sense that would exist." Most of the time it's like, "Oh, I guess that's what the plot needed in order to continue." The characters aren't much to write home about either. The main ones are very take it or leave it. You'll either love them or you're gonna find them really fucking obnoxious. Guess which camp I'm in. Most of them don't really have things like arcs or development, and they are also really rather generic for the most part. Cold person that's actually nice when you get to know him. Nice person that turns out to be an utter monster. Been there, done that. Now, being generic is not necessarily a problem, but it means you can't rely on the novelty of the design of the character, because it's old news. You gotta execute it well as well. And execute it well it does not. There is one character that I saw people give a fair bit of attention to, mostly due to the nature of the archetype. Seemingly noble but actually a monster, that type of guy. He reminds me a bit of Thanos, not the same but similar and executed worse. Not to say that Thanos is the gold standard, he's fine for the story, before the endgame at least. He's not spectacular but gets the job done. Now, imagine he got his ass whooped by a bunch of 12-year-olds, and that's kind of what you get in Made in Abyss. I heard a number of people mention the horror of this series as being a big plus. Perhaps my tolerance is a bit high. I'm not big into horror, but I am a big SCP fan, and a lot of that is horror. But whichever the reason, when I watched the show, I hardly even registered the horror at all. I can see some of the elements that you could cite, but it's kinda like saying Twilight is a horror because it has vampires. It's just far too mild to sell it as a horror, or even as saying that it has horror elements. Overall, the best bit of the show is actually the visuals. More specifically, the backgrounds. That's one thing I won't take away from the show. Those things are impressive, so much so that I suspect the author wrote the story to flesh out the landscape and not the other way around. The soundtrack is also fairly respectable, it fits the show very very well, and it's rather memorable. As for a recommendation, I am really tempted to throw it in black, but I'll go up to green, recommended only if you like the first 10 minutes. Based on most aspects, I do not recommend it, but based on its popularity alone, I do think you should watch 10 minutes and see if it gets you or not. If it doesn't, drop it. It's not getting any better. But if you like it, by all means. If you want something else with good world building, perhaps you could try Darling in the Franxx, with the warning that only like 3/4 of that show is actually good. It fucking nosedives after that. Attack on Titan also has some solid world building, but I doubt you need me to shout it out. You probably already heard of it at this point. And if you wanna know more about the many problems I have with Made in Abyss, I'll throw it up on the screen once the video is up. Also in the description, probably. I'm not sure how YouTube works anymore.